Hi again, Mark Norton here in Truro. Now I'm 10 weeks after my own H1 ceramic hip resurfacing. It's starting to feel like a bit of a distant memory now, but I'm definitely still very aware of my hip and I haven't lost all of my discomfort just yet. I've had my follow-up checkup x-ray and all looks as it was on the first day post-op, I'm pleased to say, despite or perhaps because of the recovery pattern that I've followed. So in this episode, we're going to talk about getting mobile and off your walking aids. This is the stage that most people are really looking forward to during the first 6 weeks. So this is from my own experience and from seeing thousands of my own patients over the years, and that transition from crutches to one stick and then walking completely unaided is actually quite straightforward for most people, provided that you've done the prehab work and that your surgeon has used a muscle-preserving approach. So surgical trauma has a profound effect on muscle function, and understanding exactly how the tissues heal is the scientifically valid basis for the structured return to full activity that I'm going to recommend for you. So when we operate, we have to divide or retract muscles. We have to split fascia and cut through ligaments and tendons to reach the joint. And that's regardless of what approach is used. This causes immediate bleeding inside the muscle bellies, inflammation, and temporary muscle inhibition. This is a protective reflex where the brain deliberately reduces activation of muscles to prevent further damage occurring. Even without direct cutting, the swelling and pain of the muscles trigger something called arthrogenic muscle inhibition. So your muscle strength can drop by up to 50% in the first few weeks after your surgery. Nerves that control something called proprioception and coordination are also disrupted, so your brain temporarily loses precise feedback about the position of your joint in space and the muscle coordination and timing. And this is why early gait can feel unsteady even when the joint replacement itself is entirely stable. The neurological coordination of muscles is also significantly affected by the surgery. The normal feedback loops between the joint, muscles, and your brain are temporarily disrupted by the trauma of the surgery. So this phenomenon is called arthrogenic muscle inhibition. It's a reflex inhibition of your muscle function driven by swelling, inflammation, pain, and surgical damage to the mechanical receptors that are in the hip joint capsule and the surrounding muscles and ligaments. So as a result, your brain spontaneously reduces activation of the surrounding muscles, especially the gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, and quadriceps muscles, to protect the joint. This causes reduced muscle activation, alteration of your gait patterns, such as developing a limp or shortened stride, and poorer proprioception. Studies show that these neuromuscular deficits are very common and normal after hip surgery and can persist even when pain and swelling has subsided. A 2020 clinical commentary in the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy and a 2021 review in the Journal of Sports Rehabilitation both highlight that this is one of the main reasons for persistent weakness and altered movement in the early weeks after hip procedures. The good news is that the nerves gradually return to normal function over the first 4 to 12 weeks as the inflammation settles, the swelling reduces, and the proprioceptive pathways are retrained through progressive loading and movement. Okay, so that's the muscles and the nerves, but what about the bone? Well, this is also profoundly affected by surgery. Hip resurfacing and total replacement both cause severe bone stress and damage which needs to recover. They also change the way that loads are transferred through the top end of your femur and in your hip socket. Bone is a living, dynamic tissue that constantly remodels in response to mechanical stresses placed upon it. And this is known as Wolff's Law, which is the foundation of modern bone physiology. When bone is mechanically loaded, that is compressed, bent, or stretched, the collagen fibers and the hydroxyapatite crystals which make up the bone generate tiny electrical potentials. This is a piezoelectric effect. these tiny electrical signals, together with fluid which flows through the bone's microscopic canals, act as a powerful stimulus that tell the osteoblasts, which are the bone growing cells, to lay down new bone exactly along the lines of that stress. At the same time, osteoclasts, which are the bone's scavenger cells, remove bone where it's not needed. The result is that bone literally reorganizes its internal architecture, the trabeculae, to become stronger in the direction that they are loaded. So after surgery, there's often an initial dip in bone mineral density around the implant because of inflammation and altered loading patterns. If the bone is not loaded enough, osteoclasts continue to dominate and you can continue to lose bone density. On the other hand, if it's loaded too aggressively without recovery breaks, you risk micro damage, which can then progress to macro damage and cause a fracture of the hip bone beneath your resurfacing. So the sweet spot is intermittent cyclical loading, stress followed by rest, which best stimulates the piezoelectric signals and the osteoblast to build strong, aligned bone while giving the tissue time to recover. So I'll go into this in far more detail in the next episode, which is around safely returning to sport. You also really need to listen to your surgeon's advice if they tell you to reduce the loads through your hip. This may actually mean that they've picked up something during your surgery, which needs more than the usual time for the bone to heal. So I had a patient a few months ago with a very awkward anatomy for a hip resurfacing. His femoral neck was short and quite significantly bent, which meant getting the femoral head alignment corrected was really technically difficult. I caused a notch in the femoral neck when I was doing the femoral head reaming. So I told him that he needed to stay on both crutches for the first 6 weeks and then only walk for the next 6 weeks, no running or impact activities. I then saw him at 3 months and his x-rays looked perfect. The notch had healed completely. So he's then gone on with his return to sport safely again. Okay, so that's the basic science of the muscles and ligaments and the bone recovery done, but there are other factors to consider in these first 6 weeks. And this is the differences between surgical approaches. And these become very clear in the early weeks and then gradually become less obvious by around about 6 to 8 weeks. So in the posterior approach, which is the most common way of doing a resurfacing, the short external rotator muscles at the back of the hip are divided and then sutured and repaired. The gluteus maximus muscle is split and the fascia lata is split and repaired over the top of the greater trochanter. So this leads to a temporary weakness in the gluteus maximus, which affects standing up from a seated position, climbing stairs or hills, and causes discomfort and weakness of the tensor fascia lata over the outside of the hip trochanter, particularly when standing on one leg. In the direct anterior approach, which is much less commonly done, the anterior structures, the tensor fascia lata muscle, the iliofemoral ligament, and the reflected head of rectus femoris are divided, and this causes a much more noticeable delay in the active hip flexion, especially the straight leg raise when you're lying supine on your back. Both of these approaches protect the main hip abductor muscles, so basic walking and standing are largely unaffected once the initial swelling settles. And evidence from enhanced recovery programs and multiple studies show that early mobilization is safe and highly beneficial. So most patients are walking independently with crutches or a frame by day 1 or 2. Many are down to 1 stick or completely unaided by 4 to 6 weeks. Large reviews confirm that patients who start weight bearing earlier have faster return of function, lower blood clot risk, and better long-term outcomes without increased dislocation rates. So I have a full video of an independent physio assessment I did at 3 weeks post-op. I compared myself, who had a direct anterior approach with Justin Cobb, with a patient who I operated on 5 days before my own surgery using a posterior approach. He's nearly 10 years older than me, so he's a little bit slower, but at 3 weeks out, both of us could walk well, unaided, ride a static bike, squat, and bend almost fully. But we showed exactly the relative weaknesses that I've just described. It's a really useful comparison and shows how quickly you can get back to normal function with the right preparation and with good surgery.
Nice. Okay. So as a barrier, I can get there.
No, I'd be too scared to do that.
No, right.
Just don't stir it up too much. Quite a nice one. That's good.
Tends to be when you get
Right, let's have a go. Bring it up. No.
You get
And then just
trying to get you can literally just focus on really engaging working here. And try it.
Okay. Good.
The rehabilitation protocol that worked best for me was a simple 3-day cycle. On the stress day, I pushed the time and distance, aiming for a longer, more challenging walk of 60 to 90 minutes at a good pace on a varied terrain that actually lifted my heart rate. So in the first week, that 60 minutes needed to be broken down into 5 or 6 segments to be achievable. I couldn't do the whole lot in one go. Now, after each exercise and walking session, I immediately then used my long leg and hip compression devices for 45 minutes on the legs and 30 minutes on the hip to reduce the inevitable swelling that occurred after the longer walks. I then followed that immediately with an ice pack for a full hour. On the 2 recovery days, I then reduced the length of the walks to a gentle 45 minutes or so walk on flat, easy terrain, but I still then used the compression devices 3 times a day. Essentially 1 day pushing myself and pushing the limits, followed by 2 days of easier recovery, more rest, still walking for close to an hour each day, but much slower and on easier terrain. So I believe that this aggressive swelling management is one of the single biggest factors in how quickly someone returns to normal function, and that's after your inherent fitness level, which you go into surgery with. The compression actively squeezes the excess fluid out of your traumatized tissues and back into your lymphatic system, while the ice then keeps the swelling down far more effectively once that fluid volume of the swelling has been reduced by the compression. Studies on cryocompression after hip and knee replacement, including a 2012 study published in Hip International and a 2019 study published in the Journal of Orthopedic Surgery and Research, show that combining intermittent pneumatic compression with cryotherapy significantly reduces postoperative swelling, pain, and actual blood loss compared with either modality used alone. There was a study in 2023 in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, again on pneumatic compression after total hip arthroplasty, which also demonstrated greater reduction in thigh and calf circumference when compression was used regularly in the early weeks after surgery. So I followed this system almost religiously, and it allowed the damaged muscle and tissue to recover without additional stress while still keeping me moving every day. It certainly reduced the degree of swelling and bruising which I got. I didn't do the more challenging walks every day, as you can see from the blue line on my Strava feed. And practically, the progression should go something like this. So day 0 to 7, 2 crutches for safety and confidence until you can stand on your operated leg with support only in the opposite hand. Week 1 to 3, most people are able to drop to 1 crutch on the opposite hand once they can balance well on the operated leg, and then gradually turn the crutch around to start using it as a walking stick instead. Then from weeks 3 to 6, you can usually start to walk completely unaided as long as you've got good abductor muscle strength and no pain. Keep 1 crutch handy for longer walks on uneven ground until you feel 100% safe and stable. We don't want you to have a fall onto your new hip. The key is to focus on quality rather than speed. Full weight through the operated leg, no dipping or limping, equal stride length on each side, shortening the stride on your opposite leg if necessary to keep your balance, and keeping good posture. I aim for at least 60 minutes of walking every day, building up gradually using the 3-day push and recover cycle, and I was comfortably cycling on a static bike by 4 weeks. So I managed that progression, and you can too if you're well prepared and fit before you start out. The first few weeks are about consistency and listening to your body, not racing. So the next episode is going to be on long-term recovery and maintenance, safely getting back to running and twisting sports, and keeping your new hip in there for life. There'll be a fair amount about the biology of bone healing and loading, to try to avoid a stress fracture or displacement of your implant. So if you've got any questions about ditching your crutches or your own progression, drop them in the comments. Share, like, and subscribe if the series is helping you. As always, discuss everything with your own doctor or your hospital team. Your situation may be different from mine. I'll see you next time. Take care.